Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee with Comrades, a podcast discussing current events, theory, and action through a radical lens. What's up, gang? Pearson here, back with yet another episode of Coffee with Comrades. This week, we're following up with part 2 of our conversation with Serena, Viola, and Cosby Hayes. The three of us go global, looking beyond our local community here in Tallahassee at larger struggles and movements and the intercessions and limitations of cultural production. We chat about fine art versus street art, proletarian power, and the tensions of being an artist in a time of rising fascism, rabid nationalism, and climate catastrophe. If you haven't already, be sure to check out part 1 of the conversation in episode 76 of Coffee with Comrades, Artwork. Like we mentioned last week, there's a bit of audio weirdness on this 2-part special, so we encourage folks to listen over speakers. This is an excellent opportunity to pester your partner with lefty propaganda while you're commuting, or a chance to radicalize your coworkers. Podcasts are made to be shared, so get to it. As always, huge shoutouts here at the top of the episode to the Rev Left Radio Federation and the Channel Zero Network. Our CZN Spotlight show of the month is Rebel Steps. Check out this jingle Amy and Liz put together on their program.
Rebel Steps is a podcast about taking action. Season 1 offered insights into how individuals can join movements. Season 2 focuses on the ways people can work together to build these movements. Organizing in groups presents many challenges. How do you care for each other and protect each other in the midst of political struggle? How do you lift up the voices of everyone in your group? How do you work through the inevitable disagreements? All of these questions have complicated answers. As I explore these questions, you'll hear voices and stories from my community in New York City, spotlighting a range of organizers from the Metropolitan Anarchist Coordinating Council, Outlive Them, Pop Gem, Democratic Socialist of America Libertarian Socialist Caucus, and more. Just like the first season, I return to Paulo Freire's quote, "What can we do today so that we can do tomorrow what we cannot do today?" But this time with the realization that building our capacity will necessarily happen alongside others. Find Rebel Steps on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts, and check us out on Twitter or Patreon.
If you've ever wondered how to get involved in radical politics, if listening to people talk about these ideas through your headphones just isn't quite enough, if you want to get out in the streets and get involved, Rebel Steps is an absolutely indispensable resource. Check it out wherever you get your podcasts. So with that all said and done, please enjoy episode 77 of Coffee with Comrades. Art alone can't save the world. Yeah, I was wondering too, speaking of this idea of like the kind of things that you have to do to make ends meet, the jobs you have to work. Serena, I know you specifically just recently finished your master's thesis and had this...
Undergrad, so bachelor, but yes.
Serena, I know you just recently finished your bachelor's thesis and had this wonderful art show all about working women, and it was this cool installation. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about that, talk about the zine, talk about the manifesto, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so it was like 2-part. One part was kind of, well, it was a 11 by 7 foot painting that I nailed to the gallery wall at Anderson Brickler Gallery in town by FAMU.
Shouts out.
Yeah, shout out FAMU. And so it showcased like kind of my manifestation of like women living together and like women solidarity, what it would be. And so like 7 women are just hanging out and rejoicing together, and spending their downtime not working, and sharing food and doing what people do to relax in this big painting. And then it kind of turned into a 3D setting, and I had like chairs and a coffee table where my zines were placed, and people could come and like sit and be a part of the scene and like be hanging out with these women. And so that was half of it. And then the other half, I like kind of collaged portraits onto the wall. And it was interactive, so you could write down your experience as a working woman and put it on the wall. But then I had scanned the portraits that I made of women and put it into a zine, and all these women are working women in the community, people that I'm friends with. There was the sex worker who is a sugar baby and stripper, actually lives in New York City, but I know her from Florida. And so yeah, I interviewed all of these women. I had pretty open-ended questions, and it quickly turned into them just like telling me how awful their jobs are and how awful it is to try to make ends meet all the time. And like I had read an article in Time magazine talking specifically about the tipped service industry and how that's becoming like one of the biggest jobs in America, and it's mostly made up of women, and then like specifically moms too, because the hours are flexible, and when you have to take off because your kid is sick or needs to be driven somewhere, you can. Whereas I remember my mom struggling so hard with that, like she wasn't allowed to get off work for fucking anything. And so yeah, and it's really rough because the minimum wage it's so fucked up when you say it out loud, but yeah, the minimum wage for servers is like way lower than the regular minimum wage for everyone else, and it hasn't risen since like 91 or something, and it's like $3 in some states. So if you don't get tipped well, because most people are shitty and they like don't think that they have to tip if the server like accidentally fucks up and does something because they're so fucking busy, so people can go home with like $20 because they had a bad day. And anyway, so I quoted all these women, and I have their portraits in this book. It's like kind of long, but then at the end I have like statistics and a manifesto, and I'm giving them away for like donation based amounts now, and you can, if you want one, DM me on Instagram.
Cosby, I know that you and your partner Sarah have been doing a lot of traveling recently and have met a bunch of artists all across the world. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about some of those experiences, like what are the standout moments. You guys literally just got back from Portugal and Spain. You guys were up in Canada recently. You were down in Miami and in Tampa. I was wondering if you could maybe talk about some of those experiences. Were there any like standout moments?
Yeah, for sure. We were in Port-au-Prince, Haiti in September. So kind of right before this peak in the protests that have been and still are occurring there on a daily basis, we were invited down there to paint in a festival called Festi Graffiti, and the idea was to bring like 7 or 8 artists from across the world to Haiti to paint in this graffiti jam with a bunch of local artists from Port-au-Prince. And so that was really, really incredible. We all got walls and had all of our paint and housing and everything taken care of. And just to spend like 9 days with these artists from all over the world, Belgium, France, the UK, we had folks from Boston and Miami to all be there together, living in an apartment together, and getting to go out and paint and literally communicate with our art sometimes because of the language barrier with other artists from the community was like so fucking dope. We got to see, some of the street protests and the different community actions that were going on, trying to put pressure on the government there to make changes for the people.
Because you guys were there during these like anti-government protests that were happening.
Yeah. So that was really wild. Like they would come around with these trucks with big megaphones on them, telling everybody to come out of their houses and like get in the street for the day. There was only like one day where they wouldn't let us leave our apartment for safety concerns. For the most part, everyone we talked to was pretty explicit in the fact that like their enemy was not the American people. It was the the austerity measures that were being placed on and have been being placed on the island by the IMF and the United States and kind of the international cohort there that dictates monetary policy for the rest of the world. And they understood that like not all of the American people were supportive of Trump or any of these measures that have been implemented by people from both sides of our, political spectrum, so to speak. And there was just this amazing inspiration and just this drive to create art there. Their art, in many ways, hadn't been so affected by I guess I should start over. The thing that I liked about their artwork was it just seemed more wholesome and inspired by Haiti and by the events in Haiti. And you would see like little flickers of inspiration from American artists or other artists from around the world because they're all on Instagram too. But there was just this there was this cohesiveness to their work and their interests and how they were using the spray paint and the bucket paint to create art that was more unified than I see in other communities here in the States, where everybody's art is derivative of everyone else's from all across the world, and everybody's kind of feeding from this same pool on Instagram and on the internet. There was a purity to it there that I don't necessarily see here in the States. Another cool one, we were in Toronto. We linked up with a Chilean expat living there, so we went to a couple of cool street protests that were occurring during right at the height of the civil disobedience in Chile and Santiago and kind of spreading out across the country. So that was really amazing. Got some awesome history lessons from our host, who also got us walls to paint and things like this. He had been in a brigade of painters in Santiago as a kid under Pinochet. They were a Marxist organization that organized painters, and so he had these incredible photos of them marching in the streets with their red flags and their hard hats on, holding their paintbrushes up. And
so badass.
That's awesome.
So after shitting on Instagram a little bit, I will say that it's given us some incredible opportunities, because a lot of these folks and these opportunities we found are just from like linking up with people on Instagram and getting to know each other, and then trusting each other enough to facilitate each other's artwork.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about Barcelona? You were saying about you guys were in Madrid, which is not Barcelona, but I know you painted in Barcelona. While you were in Madrid, you saw like a bunch of like really fashy stuff,
so
and that like informed kind of the murals that you painted in Barcelona as a response.
Yeah, for sure. So we were in Lisbon first, and we were having a chat with some folks that one of them organized a group of feminist painters there in Lisbon and was putting together all-female graffiti and mural jams. And so we're speaking with them, and one of them noticed my red and black sticker on my water bottle and said, hey, just so you know, like when you go to Madrid, like keep that. If you have anything else like that, anything leftist, like just put that away for your time there. And I kind of thought he was like maybe overreacting a little bit, but there was a big soccer game going on that weekend. So long story short, we show up in Madrid. We haven't even gotten out of the first cab we got in, and pull up to a red light, and there's like 4 dudes standing there with like matching jackets on with like giant iron crosses on their back. We had a cab driver that had lightning bolt tattoos behind his ear. And so, like, I know that stuff exists everywhere, and I understand that it's quite a bit more prevalent in Europe, but I was personally pretty surprised to see it so blatant and out in the open, not there for any particular event, just, like, flaunting it out on the streets.
Especially when juxtaposed with some of the stuff y'all saw in Barcelona, too.
Yeah, for sure. So Madrid, to me at least, seemed much more kind of, like, ritzy and very like consumer driven. There were all these high-end retail stores everywhere, lots of new buildings, sleek all glass design, and I don't know if that quite makes sense, but it felt like Fifth Avenue or something like that. You know what I mean? Or like the Champs-Elysees or something, where it's a bunch of wealthy people. You know, walking down the streets, I'm looking at these shops and I'm like, I can't afford anything in any of these places. Like, I need to get the fuck out of here. Leaving there and going to Barcelona was incredibly inspiring. There's this class consciousness and solidarity. There are Catalan independence flags hanging everywhere. There were banners reading "Free all political prisoners." We did see a couple of red and black flags flying on some different buildings.
You'll love to see it.
You'll love to see it. Lots of communist flags flying as well, all through Lisbon and Barcelona, which I had never seen anything like that here in the States. So it was cool to see this multi-generational class consciousness and political education that we should be lucky to aspire to here in the States.
Yeah, for sure. It's also I'm super jealous that both of you get to go to Spain. Cosby, you just got back from Spain. Serena, you're going to Spain. I just had this conversation with Danny last week about about the Spanish Civil War. So it's really awesome to hear that that culture is still very much alive and flourishing. We would, like you said, we would be so lucky as to have that.
Yeah. Dude, so many Antifa murals just everywhere there. And that just reminded me one thing. So we ended up getting to paint in Barcelona, and we decided to do a pretty large mural of Marina Ginesta. Folks who don't know her, definitely go look her up. I hesitate to mansplain too much about her history and role, but she was an incredible figure, 17-year-old volunteer photographer and journalist who was embedded with some of the revolutionary and anti-fascist forces in Barcelona during Franco's siege of that city. So really, really incredible figure. Definitely go check her out.
Dude, I need to see that. I'm sure you took a picture of it. I need to see that.
Yeah, for sure.
It reminds me of it reminds me of like the feeling that I had going to Italy with my Italian American friend, and that was the first time I'd ever gone out of the country. And in most of the cities we stopped by, there was so much leftist street art, like not really murals, but just like graffiti everywhere. And I was like, what? I've never seen that anywhere in the United States. And I was like, fuck yeah, like I feel good.
Yeah,
I found my people.
Yeah.
It definitely covers like every inch of every city there. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, well, I want to kind of talk about this tension between fine art and street art, because I'm really often struck by the ephemerality of unsanctioned art. Like, it's there and then it's gone, right? And it part of the thing that's always kind of fascinating to me is sort of the mystical, fleeting nature of it, right? Like that it's there for a little bit and then it's gone. And, going out under the cover of darkness and putting up, works of art where they're not supposed to be, it has this thrilling quality, right? The hiss of aerosol, the adrenaline of looking over your shoulder and making sure there's no one coming, the heartbeat thundering in your eardrums when you're fucking running from the cops. I know you do a lot of public murals, Cosby, and so I was wondering if you could maybe talk a bit about your affinity for street art more generally, and like opening that up to a more general conversation about the differences and the tensions between street art and public murals that you randomly just throw up for the hell of it. Like the difference between like a work of art that's sanctioned that you're being paid to do versus something that you're just like, well, I have this spontaneous desire to create something and I'm going to go do it.
Yeah. I grew up painting graffiti, and actually when I was much younger, I thought that street art was kind of played out, and I don't know, I just wasn't a big fan of it. There is this weird tension even amongst this, like, as you put it, unsanctioned, spontaneous art. There's this tension between graffiti artists and street artists, and like who is the originator of painting, unsanctioned in a community on a wall, and leaving that there. I think that, as we mature and grow and kind of change as artists, and we're all trying to figure out who we are and what type of art we want to produce. I found murals to kind of scratch that same itch that graffiti did, while also giving me an opportunity to speak more specifically and openly about certain things that I care about or that are on my mind or that I hope other people will consider and should be, paying attention to and caring about in a way that I wasn't really able to achieve by just painting graffiti.
Right.
I think that, I was kind of pushed into the medium that I've been most interested in, kind of through a necessity to start making a living and just having multiple business owners asking me to paint signs for them and, small murals and things like this. And so, in some ways, I guess I'm a little bit of a sellout in that way. I think there is this like raw beauty to going out and creating, and I still do from time to time. I'm not going out in the middle of the night and risking being arrested for doing any of these things anymore. But we'll sometimes when we're in a city, we'll just go paint for free because we want to create something in that space. We don't want to be told what we have to paint and what it should look like. And
like when you and I were at the DSA conference,
yeah,
and we went to that street art like wall park thing where people were like skating and having picnics and stuff, and y'all were up underneath this overpass working on murals. I think Sarah had painted like a peach because it's the peach state, and like these two hands that were holding a peach, and you had worked on like this like basically like the DSA like logo
convention poster
convention.
I think sometimes, especially so having been at that convention all weekend and like sitting in that room for hours and hours and hours, just feeling so cooped up and not being able to create or express myself, sometimes these moments happen where it's like I have the paint, I have the time, and I have a little spot that I can go jam, and you just like have to do it. It's not always about what's going to add some, new piece to your portfolio or what's going to make money. Sometimes you just want to create, and I think going out and doing it like that in conditions that aren't always the most ideal. You don't have a ladder, you didn't bring enough water, or you're working with the 3 colors of paint that you had on you.
It's hot as fuck.
It's hot as fuck under an overpass. Yeah. I think all of those things kind of ground you and can be humbling. And for me, at least, they certainly remind me of all of the nights and days that I spent painting just to paint, not because I knew that's what my career was going to be or because I knew I could make a living off of it, but just doing it because it was like a catharsis and because I appreciated it,
Yeah.
Cosby, I think it's intense to, call yourself a sellout. I think that if we're choosing, if art is our calling, we're an artist, and to be an artist and to have art as your career in America, there's just things that you have to do. Like, am I going to be a sellout when, my goal is to have my paintings worth $5,000 so I'll be able to survive for a month or two on that money. And I think as long as, we're conscious and we're also, like that artist that I said that I loved, Jeffrey Chiang, like as long as we're, I always want to be able to have art that is $20 that someone can like pick up, anyone can.
Like Prince or something.
Yeah, and as long as we're still making art with our community and for our community, while also, trying to make it as an artist in the United States, it's like...
We exist under capitalism,
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to be able to extricate ourselves from it just yet, right? Like, as much as we hope for and struggle for a post-capitalist society, we're just not there yet, right? And so, like, it does, still raise that interesting tension, though, between works of art that you create because they bring you joy and works of art that you create because of the commission.
Yeah.
And I am curious about that sort of cognitive or emotional or spiritual dissonance, and I was wondering if you could maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I low-key hate commissions. Maybe hate's a strong word, and I also, hesitate to say that in most situations because, please commission me. I need the money, and that's why I do them. But definitely, if I didn't have to, I probably would do them a lot less, because a lot of time they're really just not fun to do. And then sometimes they are. Sometimes people will ask me to do things that are right up my alley, and I'm like, fuck yes. But yeah, it can just get really complicated working for someone else, and the freedom. I mean, I think most artists, strive for the freedom to be able to create whatever they want.
And for people to find value in it.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What do you think, Cosby?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Sarah and I definitely both find ourselves creating work for patrons who want something very specific and that doesn't tie into our larger body of work. As artists, I think we kind of end up rationalizing it basically as, well, what is it going to take for me to be able to put the art out into the world that I, feel driven to create? Mm-hmm. And one of those things sometimes is creating work for patrons that can feel a little bit soul-sucking, to be honest, whether it's creating a logo or painting some really like mild composition of some half-hearted creative idea that some business owner has for their wall that they think is really witty, and it's actually like super fucking lame. But we got to pay rent and we got to buy food if we want to keep creating the art we want to create. And so, like you said, we exist within this capitalist system. I don't think that should be used all of the time to justify everything that makes us feel gross about something we're doing. But mm-hmm. I think that it's important to remind ourselves of the system that we exist within, and the forces that it's imposing on us at various times in our art careers. So it's definitely this weird dialectic that I'm constantly wrestling with. And my feelings on it change pretty rapidly on a regular basis, I'll be honest. But I look at these artists, like I mentioned earlier, like Diego Rivera or many of his other contemporaries, and they usually found ways to kind of fit their agenda into many of their works. And I know, just speaking for Sarah and I, we've definitely done that. We've had clients that have expressed, or building owners at least, that have expressed some takes on things that were, pretty offensive to us, and we offered to walk away completely. And the middleman or the organizer of the mural, the curator, has gotten us to come back to the table if we're given full creative freedom. And so we found ways to hide sometimes literal hidden messages in our murals as a fuck you to the...
Can you give an example?
Yeah, we had a building owner in Havana who, during one of the initial meetings, keep in mind, this building owner wasn't paying us any money, hadn't paid to repair his wall. The city had paid for us to be there creating as artists and had paid to repair this massive wall, and the city was paying for the lift, and this arts council as well. So this man, all he had to do was say, yeah, sure, you can paint my wall. It needed paint on it anyways. In this process, he expressed some pretty racist views on the concept that we had presented for him. Essentially, he didn't want anyone painted on his wall that wasn't white. And so rather than painting a white person, we just changed the hues in the figure so that they were definitely not white, but not explicitly from any other backgrounds. And then in the background, let me restate that. In addition to that, a little bit of background on the community we were creating in. It's predominantly African American. I think it's one of the only counties in Florida that is minority majority, and so we thought it imperative that we create a mural that reflected that. And this building owner was not willing to negotiate with us. So in the background of our mural, we hid the message Black Lives Matter, and we had many people come up to us through the process and kind of were slowly like figuring out what was going on in the background, and they were really stoked on it, and were like calling people over to explain it to them and stuff. And so it was cool to see like the right people know what was going on, and for the people that we didn't intend, it went right over their heads.
Right. You love to see it.
Love to see it.
It makes me think too about this this tension. Speaking about the tension between like art that you make for yourself and that you hope other people find value in, and art that's commissioned. It also speaks to me about this like tension that also exists between fine art and street art. And I wonder if you guys accept the kind of axiomatic view that like street art is more proletarian than fine art, or if you think that is a silly sort of binary and that there's more of a dialectical cohesion between fine art and street art.
I mean, I definitely feel like it could be a whole episode critiquing the fine art world. It can be so elitist, which is really unfortunate and intimidating, as I don't have all the answers. I mean, I guess you could say I'm an emerging artist, but I'm really just starting out with my art career. And then also like the spaces that you find fine art in, like galleries and museums, like those are exclusionary spaces that really people who have the time and energy and money to go to those places can go to, whereas street art, public art, and even things like zines that you can like hand out to people are definitely more proletarian and inclusive and for everybody. And I mean, I'm sure it is more nuanced than that, but there's definitely a lot of truth to that, unfortunately.
I don't think that there is, like, when you really dig into it, I don't think that there is much proletarian about the fine art world. I think much of it, as I said earlier, is predicated on nepotism and connections and access to different resources that elevate various artists and connect them to wealthy collectors and gallery owners and curators. And when you look at street art, I think its roots are inherently proletariat. Anyone who is interested in diving deeper into the origins of that movement should definitely check out Style Wars. It's a really great documentary. I think the whole thing is on YouTube. It shows kind of like some of the early years of the graffiti scene and the multi-generational and multi-class movement that it was, and how these young people were engaging with and interacting with the neighborhoods that they were living in and traversing in their day-to-day lives, and how they were taking control of that and leaving their mark and making the space look different with the marks that they were making, and how that evolved, and how that, they were building on each other and communicating with each other and expressing their different aesthetics and ideals and what they thought was good graffiti. The street art and graffiti world has been totally commandeered by interests that are focused on nothing more than generating profit. And that almost always leads to a decline in public interest in something. It gets played out, or it's no longer in vogue. I think that graffiti will continue to be a thing because, for the most part, graffiti isn't created to make money. It's created by, it's a group of artists using this special language to kind of communicate with and build off of each other's ideas. And so I think that graffiti will keep pumping along as it always has since its kind of creation. It'll be interesting to see what happens with street art. A lot of it is more kind of like drag and drop, ready, consumable and enjoyable, and then some of it's much deeper, as a lot of the earlier street art was, where it's conceptual or explicitly political, but you see it being printed on tote bags and $1,500 jackets, and it's on the runway and shit. And you know, so it all gets watered down. I think that's why I've seen a lot of other artists kind of have this natural reaction to look farther back in history at not just the history of graffiti and street art, but of mural making as a tradition.
Right.
And the Works Progress Administration here in the United States and the federal government dumping millions into programs to put artists and craftsmen back to work, creating mosaics in subways and murals in banks in rural Alabama, and going all the way to the Virgin Islands to hire American artists and craftsmen to create something beautiful that would speak to the people in those areas, and to literally celebrate the workers and the labor that is required to keep the country moving and to keep society going. And we haven't really seen an injection of capital from the federal government or state governments like that since, and I hope we will again. I know that there's been some talk, at least like in the Sanders campaign, about programs to put various trades and craftsmen back to work, and artists are definitely on that list. I think that would be really interesting to see. I'm rambling, but my point is, you see more artists looking farther back in history for inspiration now that 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s movement of graffiti and this like early aughts and 2000s thing of like Banksy and stencils and all that shit is like kind of played out and has run its course in my mind anyway.
And been co-opted,
right? So like it doesn't have the same, it's not, before it was like this small community of people doing it for themselves and for each other, and now it's like a recognizable product. Mm-hmm. And so people have to dig deeper to find things to pull from and to be inspired by, and I think it's leading us honestly to a more wholesome and virtuous version of that medium.
Yeah, like they'll cut out Banksy's graffiti like from a wall and then sell it for millions of dollars or some shit. I mean, I hate to even talk about it, but
no,
sad. And I wanted to bring up the story of what happened to me about a month ago, because while I'm not like a muralist, a lot of the times artists will just be able to like put their art and translate it onto a wall, and I've always wanted to do that, so I was like seeking opportunities, and my professor sent me one, and so I went to meet with these people, and I hadn't read the email thoroughly, but when I
always read the email, folks.
Oh, I know, always read the email thoroughly, but when I got there and started talking to them, I got the feeling that they weren't gonna pay me, and so I asked them, and they were like, "No, we're gonna give you a year of juice." And it was, so awkward, and I didn't really know how to handle it in person, but I was just like, oh, yeah, I'll have to rethink. I'm so sorry. I didn't know that. And I, like, once I got back in my car, I called Sarah and Cosby to ask them, like, what to do and, like, what the hell? And they were like, what the fuck?
I was getting so... Sarah was holding the phone, and I'm sure I was, like, a crazy person in the background yelling, but I'm like, dude, you can't pay your rent with fucking juice. Gallons of juice, like, or exposure dollars, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And like, I promise you that business owner was paying his electrician. I promise that business owner was paying his catering workers,
the construction people that are renovating that place.
Everybody else is getting paid except for the artists, right? They're gonna try and sneak by on it'll be good for your career, or the kombucha's fire. You know what I mean? It's like, fuck off.
Yeah, and I sent them a big text messages about it, because Sarah helped me with pricing, and I was like, look, you have to pay me, and this would be like the minimum amount that you should, and they never texted back. Mm-hmm. So they obviously didn't want to pay an artist. So sad.
The noble small business owner.
Small business tyrants
down there on Main Street, fighting a good fight.
Yeah, Jesus fucking Christ. One of the big hallmarks of gentrification is when art galleries start popping up in neighborhoods, mm-hmm. right? Like, and that's like a red flag that like, oh, the white folks are moving in here and the property values are going to soar. And I was just kind of thinking about like how can we resist those kinds of capitalist interventions into the creation of art, and ways that allow us to still generate moving and poignant and important works of cultural production. And I was wondering, if part of this question, if you guys are into it, if we could do a little bit of like world building, dreaming kind of thing, and think about like what art galleries might look like in a post-capitalist society. And then, maybe more importantly, what steps we can actually take to prefigure that sort of society right here and right now.
Yeah, that's a super super tough question. I think understanding that like not all galleries are retirement plans or major investments for some family or a group to get rich quick. I think
like 621 Gallery, which is a nonprofit in Tallahassee, and then like Venvi Art Gallery here, like the owners of that, I mean, one of the owners is an artist herself, and then they like kind of lose money every year by keeping that gallery open, but I think they just love art and they have to do it and they're able to do it, and that's true.
I don't think it's like something that can be solved with like broad strokes, because in my mind at least, it requires you to be able to look closely and to determine whether it's an art gallery or some other enterprise is there because it is of the community and for the community, or whether it's there because the rent was cheaper 4 blocks north and it's looking like that property is going to be worth some money in the future, and anytime we can mitigate that type of behavior, I think it's good. I think supporting your local arts councils and communicating with them directly about these processes as they happen in your community is really important, and to make sure that the leadership of these arts councils and of your city commissions and county commissions or councils are aware of them, and know where these people who are in charge and who can make decisions stand on these issues. If they don't really see it as a problem that Hilton's coming in, then maybe you want to consider engaging with some of your other leaders and officials who are willing to discuss the negative effects of things like that, and to make sure that your arts councils are aware that just because it's an art gallery doesn't mean that they mean well for the people who already live in those communities, right? It's not one way or the other all the time. And so I don't know how you go about reworking that system. I don't know that there is a panacea for it, but I think anytime you can identify folks who are there because that's their community and they're bringing something really special to that community and the art world at large, I think that's important to hold that up and help facilitate that.
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, no, that was great. And I think, I don't have many answers, but I will say like supporting your local artists and supporting living artists, like so many people, well, mostly rich people, but are like making dead artists paintings worth millions of dollars, and it's like, seriously, just support your local artists. And I'm so passionate about this, like, don't buy art from Target, like this mass-produced picture of tulips. Like, please don't buy art from TJ Maxx or Walmart or
IKEA or something.
Yeah, just it's pretty easy to meet a local artist and buy their art. And support places like The Plant in Tallahassee, which is a DIY space for artists and activists. And they host a lot of art shows. Like just the other week, I went to an art show, Presence, and it was, honoring Black women. It was all about Black women, and it was so great. There were like, I think 100 people showed up, and The Plant is like so tiny. And it was a really great opportunity for the community to come together and support these artists. But I think there's opportunities like that where we can just have a great art community.
Yeah, the DIY spaces I think are huge, and it's so hard to find DIY spaces in like many cities these days. I mean, even the plant. I love the fucking plant, but the plant's like barely holding on, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, I think Tallahassee is really fortunate to have a DIY like community space. Because you go to somewhere like Orlando, there are none. Like, and I would know if there were, because I mean there might be one now, but like there wasn't when I was living there, right? And like I think that, you know, it's interesting to think about, you know, just how important like DIY and community spaces are in a community, especially for the type of, you know, work that we do, whether as, you know, y'all as artists or as community organizers. You know,
and artists are so innovative. Like, I've heard endless stories of artists just like asking people to use their space, like abandoned buildings, like to put up art shows. Or like in Tampa right now, I just read an amazing article about how a couple professors and artists are using their garages as art galleries, and like they're amazing art galleries right now, hosting a lot of emerging artists in Tampa. Like, I'm sure you can Google it and find these galleries, but I just think that's amazing that they've turned their garages into a great space for art. Like, when I originally read the question of like, what would this world look like, I thought of a place that I had been before, and I don't remember where I was, but you like went up in this building and it was like all artist studios, and when the sign said open, you could just go in and like look in all these artist studios and see the artists working and everything. And I wish that every city had multiple buildings like that, where artists could have a free place to work, and then you could also like have it be open to the public, for the public to like talk to these artists and get to know them and see their art. That would be really great. And to also have grants and, you know, and a stable income, stable livable wage for artists, like whether they sell their work or not. Like if artists were provided their basic needs to live, like we could just make art and give it away for free. That would be so great, and everyone could just have art and participate in it and experience it.
It's almost as if the profit motive ruins everything.
Yeah, and it, I mean, obviously allows for so many other people who aren't as fortunate, you know, as I consider myself to be, to get to do this, and who have to work for far less money, doing far more difficult, demanding jobs, you know. I know that when we talk about these things, they can both make sense and seem a little bit trivial in comparison to minimum wage laws or worker benefits or the lack thereof. But I think it's like directly tied to it. And totally. I think that in an administration that allows, or a government that allows for this type of treatment of the everyday worker, the hourly wage worker, you're always going to have the lack of importance on facilitating art and culture. And so they go hand in hand. And so if one exists, the other is going to exist.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about like the tensions between being a quote-unquote struggling artist or a worker. And I think it's worth reiterating that, like, artists are workers, right? And that, you know, the labor that you're doing has value, and that it contributes to the sort of emotional and cultural well-being, right? It reminds us of what it means to be a human. And this is something I think about all the time as a writer, because I keep thinking about the integral importance of art in human society, right? Especially in times of accelerating climate change, rising fascism, working class immiseration. It seems to me that art is what precisely reminds us of what it means to be human beings, of how to actually be an authentic agent in the world today. And I'm wondering how we can resist these really myopic ideas of art as a luxury or as an indulgence, right? And reimagining the integrity and integral nature of art as being something that is life-affirming and brings joy and hope and vibrancy to life.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that this might seem like an oversimplification of an answer, but like it starts with education. Like, people have to be given the context well, first you have to give them access to the artwork. So allowing people to just buy up artwork, whether it's historical or contemporary, and hide it away in a climate-controlled storage locker until it increases in value is a massive problem to that. And it's like cultural drain. You know what I mean?
And like all the museums that like have stolen cultural artifacts from other countries, like
right.
just I think it's the Met that hasn't given, or maybe they are making people are trying to get back all the art that the Met has stolen from multiple countries all over the world. And it's
yeah. So in addition to these works of art being bought up and hidden away, we don't place enough of an emphasis, at least here in the United States, on not just exposing people to art, but giving them the cultural content and historical context for them to understand why the art was made, and what it was being made about, and what societal forces, economic forces were moving that artist to create that artwork, you know, in that art movement that they were in. And I think that you need all of that to really understand it and appreciate it. That's not to say that you can't just walk into an art gallery and appreciate art that you have no context around, but I think that it's important for really being able to hold up these works and celebrate them and understand why it's not just about preserving the artwork that already exists, it's about facilitating and curating creativity today so that, you know, it continues on.
Well said.
Yeah, like I think everyone should have to take an art history class in college, there should be art history in elementary and middle school, and I guess I had a little bit in kindergarten, but hardly anything. And I totally agree with the education aspect, and it goes back to the conversation about STEM majors being so clueless when it comes to culture and history and stuff. Sorry, guys. And, I wish everyone was able to like just dive into humanities studies because it's so important.
And if anyone ever wonders whether art can be powerful today, or art that was created a long time ago can have real impact today, circling back to shithead Picasso, his painting of Guernica, there's a reproduction of it that hangs as the backdrop to the podium or the dais at the UN. And in 2002 or 2003, Colin Powell was presenting the final argument on why the international community should join the U.S. in invading Iraq in the run-up to the Iraq War. And the Bush administration actually requested that the UN remove the replication of Guernica that was hanging behind the podium until after that speech and that pitch was given to the UN to co-sign this invasion. For people who don't know, the painting of Guernica depicts the fascist bombing of the city Guernica in northern Spain.
Just like the horrors of war.
Exactly. The horrors of modernized, mechanized warfare. And it really was like the first massive aerial assault that led to the massacre of innocent, children and civilians. Everybody else. Yeah. So that work created in the 30s had a direct impact on how imperialist nation 70 years later decided to make their pitch on invading another country. So let's not forget how important these works are and why it's important to create and facilitate the next generation of artists.
Yeah. Well, speaking of art history, I think the last big kind of question that I have for y'all, the one that's maybe hard to answer, is the tension between bourgeois art, which is something we've been exploring for a while now, and art that was made by and for education, for the poor, for like the joyful act of just creating something. And I'm thinking about like where we are, staring down the barrel of a loaded gun, looking at, climate catastrophe, the likes of which is utterly unprecedented in the history of human civilization, and why y'all think art is something that is vital for us to hold on to, perhaps now more than ever?
I hope I don't piss anyone off by saying this, and I'm sure there's a lot that I don't know about it, but I kind of hate like religious old art that's like, that was, you know, commissioned by the Medicis or whatever, and
it's so banal.
Yeah, I just really can't get into it. Classical art, I just gotta say, I don't particularly like it, and I'm so thankful for contemporary art. Yeah, I just feel like proletarian art is important because, like, I went to this museum in New Orleans last year. I think it's the Ogden Museum, and they had a folk art exhibition up, and oh my god, I could have just spent forever in this exhibition. It was so beautiful. Oh my god. And so folk art, for people who don't know, is art by people who weren't like, who didn't go to school for it. You know, they just did it because they wanted to, and you know, and just like the narratives and the stories that can be told in art that words can't even really express is really beautiful. The other day I watched a video about how, you know, kids can learn more when they doodle in their notebooks, and it's like you can learn so much through visual art. It's really beautiful. You know, why do I make art? Why am I doing this? Why am I not just dedicating all my time to activism? And then I forget what exactly they said, but they were like, oh yeah. And then I'm reminded, like, this is important too, and I should be doing this. And I mean, obviously art can't save the world, but I do believe that it is essential. And while it cannot, you know, solve these problems, I think you need to make the art about these problems while simultaneously like taking action, and it can't be just like one or the other. Like, while we definitely need art, yeah, you definitely have to also get out there in the streets and organize and meet your community.
I think that it's really hard to address this topic without kind of falling into these cliches, but you know, at the end of the day, like, I really do think that art is this uniquely human characteristic that has played such a vital role in our development and understanding of each other and the experience of being human. And I think that it's grounding, and it is one of the few things that I see left that really forces people to just like stop and think about themselves outside of the context of their own lives and the difficulties and confusion and stressors of the modern world. And it asks you to compare your own experiences to those of others, to those of different times, and different hardships, and it will teach you, it can educate you, it can persuade you, it can offend, it can repulse, it can do so many different things. And so to me, I think that it's just like fundamentally worth protecting and preserving and giving the best environment to continue to flourish. When we talk about these issues of climate change, or, you know, the rise of nationalism and fascism across the world, what are we trying to preserve? What are we trying to stave that off to keep and to build on? I think art is one of those things, right? Like, art is part of culture and society and our experience together in this world. And so I don't think that we're fighting for this like bland world where there isn't color and experience and hardship that's being discussed and worked through. And I think that art is required to do all of those things. And so when we talk about preventing climate change or pushing back on these horribly barbaric and abusive movements, art is one of the things that we're going to use to fight those things, and it's one of the things that we're going to use to rally people against those things, and it's one of the things that if we don't use it and we don't address these problems, it won't be around, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you're talking about the effects of art, like on the body and, you know, humans, it made me think about how I used to say, I will know that I've made good art when it's made someone cry.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, one of your murals had made that woman come up to you crying. And I remember one of the first times I had made someone cry, I just like couldn't believe it. I was like, this made you have that emotional response. And one of the best pieces of art that I've ever seen was in the MoMA. It was Nan Goldin's Ballad of Sexual Dependency, which was, you walked into this room and it was dark, and then there were these photos playing in like a slideshow with like this carefully curated music playlist that was beautiful. And she, you know, lived during the 80s, 90s, and like had a lot of friends during the AIDS crisis that were, you know, going through all the struggles related to that and drug addiction. And these photos, you know, there were like women with bruised eyes and everything, and I was just like literally sobbing, like watching this art happen. And so yeah, it's very impactful. And I was reading an article the other day that kind of put it, you know, in an interesting perspective to me, and it was saying how it was saying that there's like so many useless jobs these days, like lawyers and financial analysis and all these things, that like if they kind of like all disappeared,
the world would be a better place.
The world would be okay, or a better place. But then if musicians and artists,
I don't ever want to live in a
and
world
poets and filmmakers disappeared, you know, I can't even imagine that world.
Yeah.
But it would be totally terrible.
Yeah.
So.
It's wild because I think we really take for granted, especially in this country, that it has made such a capitalist enterprise out of art and entertainment. Like we really take it for granted, but like when you think about that kind of a bleak and sterile and ugly, harsh reality where art isn't something that would occur at all, it's a terrifying prospect.
You get that when you give power and influence to these different interests and occupations like lobbyists and art dealers and these remora that just like latch onto the belly of like something with cultural significance and try and like feed off of the dregs of it, or in some cases like actually suck the life force out of it, you know. I think it requires us to really look closely at different institutions, whether it be museums or galleries or arts councils, and to parse through and decide which ones are really benefiting the communities that they're existing in, and which ones are more parasitic and are there solely for profit motive.
Yeah, totally. Well, gang, this has been a very wide-ranging and awesome conversation. Thank you both so much for coming on the show. Before we part ways, can you let listeners know where they can follow you both online so they can stay up to date with your work, and how they can support you or other artists just more generally?
You can literally just support me by following me on Instagram. I would appreciate that. Unfortunately, I feel like it helps me to survive as an artist, having Instagram followers. What a time. But it's at Serena Viola Art, SerenaViolaArt. Thank you, Pearson, for having me on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. My handle is at Cosby Hayes. You can also follow my partner. We do most of our large paintings together, Sarah Painter. Her Instagram is at Sarah Painter. And we have a joint account, which is SPCH Walls, which is a collection of most of our collaborations together. So you can kind of get a good feel for what I'm talking about when I speak directly on my portfolio and my personal work, and then some of the more client-based work that we find ourselves doing as practicing artists in the Deep South.
Beautiful. The birds are lamenting the end of this conversation. Well, listen, seriously, y'all are beautiful, and I love both of you very much. Appreciate y'all. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Solidarity.
thanks,
And that about does it for this week's episode of Coffee with Comrades. This is an entirely DIY show run by workers for workers. If you like what you hear, you can follow us on Twitter at CoffeeWComrades and Instagram at CoffeeWithComrades. Check out our website, www.coffeewithcomrades.com, and sign up to support our work with a monthly contribution by going to www.patreon.com/coffeewithcomrades. You can find Coffee with Comrades on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you go to get your anti-capitalist propaganda. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. While you're there, smashing that subscribe button, be sure to rate and review the show as well to help us increase our reach. If you have feedback, criticism, or you'd just like to get in touch with us, shoot us an email at coffeewithcomrades@gmail.com. Until next time, stay wild out there, comrades.
Disguise. Spray it down to reset. Clean bodies at rest. Pull the wool over my eyes. Over my eyes. Push me till the very end. This life was all but over when all of my friends found their graves. Use me till there's nothing left to shoot me with your medicine till I can't feel any more pain. I'm numb to this place. Painting pictures in my head, painting pictures painting pictures in my head, painting pictures in my head, painting pictures painting pictures in my head. All the signals turn this town off. You see right through me. Just turn this town off. Push me till the very end. This life was all but over when all of my friends found their graves. Use me till there's nothing left to shoot me with your medicine till I can't feel any more pain. I'm numb to this place. Painting pictures in my head, painting pictures painting pictures in my head, painting pictures in my head, painting pictures painting pictures in my head.
Awesome.
Yo, I heard y'all are recording a podcast.
We're definitely gonna put bloopers in because there's been plenty of shenanigans. I can't believe this guy It's just so loud.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's like he's a worker. He's got to do his thing, but also, you know.
What was that?
That was him breathing into my crotch.